Welcome to Moving Forward After a Job Loss, sponsored by the ABA Career Center. Moderating the program today is Kathy Morris. Kathy is founder of Advisement Limited and former director of career counseling and placement for Northwestern University School of Law, former director of the ABA Career Resource Center and the Center for Continuing Legal Education. She has decades of experience with guiding law students, lawyers, and law firms, focusing on attorney training and professional development. Kathy, you may proceed with the program.
Thank you, Bonnie. Welcome, everyone. We have a great conversation to engage you with today. We want to thank our ABA sponsor, the Career Center. I'd like to, without further ado, tell you about who our terrific speakers are, because as hard as today's topic is to discuss, we really have two people who have had lots of experience in this arena. Both are lawyers. Of course, Carol Kanarek, who hails today from New York, practiced law and opened her own lawyer career counseling practice and is really a veteran in this field. She does a lot of work with lawyers who have lost jobs, a lot of outplacement work and other private counseling, and is a leader in career issues across the board. Carol has an MSW as well as a law degree, so she brings another dimension to this whole topic. And Mark Weber, who is a Midwestern colleague as well as over many years, has now gone east. He served first as the Dean of Career Services at the University of Illinois College of Law, and then going out to Harvard Law School, where he now holds that role as Assistant Dean. He's of course, also a leader in the arena and is very active in NALP and widely nationally respected, as is Carol. So let me, if you haven't been part of our programs before, quickly go to the agenda. And we go through some conversational questions that I will throw out. There are short tips that the speakers have for you. We take your questions as we go. There's a moment where I toss out a thought, and each speaker will either agree or disagree and say why. We have some takeaways, so there'll be some things to leave you with as we move ahead, and the resources from the Career Center. But also, you know, these are our top issues. You've called in today, so we know you want to hear about how a job search really goes after a job loss. We're really focusing on that particular juncture and what not to do, what not to say during your search, and again, how to strengthen your search and stay on course. So that said, we're going to start focusing on getting right into the frame of mind that people often have following a job loss. And, you know, but my question really first, and Carol, let me direct this to you as we start out. Wouldn't the first thing that a person should do be to get right back on the horse and begin their job search? What are your thoughts on that?
Hello, everybody. It's actually most important that you're in the right frame of mind before you start the job search. It's often, you know, a very traumatic event for someone, and so it's most important that you stay away from discussing the situation with people who are either negative or well-meaning but inept. And that could even include your parents or a partner, someone you know who's been in the same firm or organization for his or her whole professional life, or headhunters. Very often, people assume that because there's a career services office at their law school, that headhunters are some kind of an extension of that. And the fact is that headhunters actually don't represent you. They're hired to find square pegs for square holes, and they probably place less than 1% of experienced lawyers in new jobs. But they can make you feel bad and also make you unemployable by sending you to all kinds of places that you might be able to get into on your own. So instead, you really need to talk with people who will help you feel more positive and have the right story before you reach out to potential employers.
Carol, that's really good advice. And let me offer another first step. You really need to understand what happened. I mean, was it bad luck? Was there a performance issue that needs to be addressed? And the reason you need to do this is so you can figure out what happened so that you're not, if there is a mistake, you're not making the same ones. It's only once you understand it that you can figure out the next steps to find a new job that will hopefully be right for you.
Yeah, I think, Mark, the way you sometimes put that to me, which I thought was extremely cogent as to why it matters if you really understand what happened or not, is, do you remember what you said to me about that? If it's mentionable?
If it's mentionable, it's manageable. And I think that's critical, because you can't figure out how to talk about something until you have a sense of why it happened and understand it. And if you can't start to, manage your feelings, what happens is a great opportunity might come along, and if you're not ready for it and you're not in the right mindset, you could take yourself out of the running for an amazing, job. So you've got to get this part, your framework, your mindset, you've got to be in the right place. And I can't emphasize how important that is because it's much more of an intangible. You really want to get into this. You want to be doing action items. But this is one where you really got to be looking a little bit more introspectively to figure certain things out before you move forward.
And in addition to introspectively, what are some other ways people could go about, let's say, sorting out what happened if they're unclear? Carol, do you have a thought about that for people?
Yes. In fact, it's often because legal employers are, by definition, lawyers, they tend to be always thinking they're risk averse, and so there is a tendency not to present a situation to someone who is being asked to leave in a way that is completely clear. And therefore, people may think that it's all completely their fault when in fact there are many other factors that come into play. And what's very important is to talk to someone who is on your side, a career services person, a career counselor, someone at the employer that you trusted or worked with, someone who has left your employer that you trusted and worked with, clients, in the case of more senior people, even people who have worked for you, so that you can really get a sense of the entire picture and figure out how much of it may be due to economics, to politics, to other issues that may not have anything to do with you. Of course, it's also important for you to use this as an opportunity to take a look at your own strengths and weaknesses so that if there were things that you were inadvertently doing that were contributing to the issue, that you either fix them or you say, this isn't me, so that you don't replicate them in the next job that you go into.
All right. I think that helps. Are there other initial steps people should take before they start talking to potential employers? What if, like I said, what if they're feeling this sense of loss that you mentioned, I think, and that, they kind of feel stigmatized. They sort of feel, sort of stuck in that. What other initial steps are there? Mark, do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I do. I think it's common to feel like you want to go into hibernation, but you need not to do that. Here's where you need to get your support system in place after a job loss. This is when you want to reach out and surround yourself with people who know you and who care about you. So I guess the basic theme here is you need to take care of yourself. And going back to the phrase I said before, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And you want to be able to talk about it with people who know you, who care about you, so that you are in, again, the appropriate mindset.
Speaking of mindset, Carol, I know that, as I mentioned, you're a lawyer and, so to speak, a therapist in MSW. Are there other thoughts you have about sort of this the mood, the stigmatization, the sort of what you can do?
Yes, definitely. I have been doing this. I graduated from law school 35 years ago, but I've been doing this for 25 years. And my greatest observation is that lawyers tend not to talk to each other about losing a job. And the fact is that because the legal system is uniquely weird in terms of up or out and all that kind of stuff, the vast majority of lawyers do lose a job at some point, but they tend not to talk to each other about it. So as a result, it's very common for people to feel like they're the only ones that this has happened to. So if you can really sort out what happened and talk to positive people about it, or people who are on your side, you can begin to approach the job search process in a positive way, so you don't think there's something terribly wrong with you. The worst thing you can do when you start the job search process is to reach out to people who could be potential employers or people who could connect you with potential employers and talk to them as if they were therapists or counselors or, people that you can express your feelings with. You need to deal with the feeling part of it, the right side of the brain part of it, with someone who is on your side and safe before you move to the actual job search process, which is really much more of a left brain process.
Carol, you mentioned the word process, and I want to emphasize that losing a job is also a process and not necessarily an event. If it's totally fresh and raw, you may well feel negative, you might be defensive, and not be able to put your best foot forward. I know I sound like Dr. Phil, but we're telling you need to we want to encourage you to work through this first so that you can be your own advocate and do a good job with the job search.
I think that's all such good advice, and actually we have a question from an audience member, which I think is an important segue to our next topic, which is going to be about what to say and not to say during your search. But let me read you this question, and gosh, it's a hard one. I'm going to see which of your names I want to call first to talk to this. This is a 27-year-old attorney, and he said he'd never once been terminated, though he recently lost his job following a major surgery, and asks what you would recommend he say and not say about that, since he understands the situation. But what do you say when attending? He talks about interviews, but let's even talk about when you're thinking about reaching out and networking, when you're trying to understand what happened and how you're going to present it. He said this is the first time he's ever been terminated from a job, and he's been working since he was 13 years old. So this is, I'm sure, an upsetting situation. So I don't know. Let me see, Mark. What advice would you give our friend?
Well, the first thing I would say is I think everyone during their lifetime is going to have some setbacks, and being terminated is not I think it's much more common now than ever. I think the question you're alluding to a major surgery. I don't, what I'd say is that depending on what the issue was, I think I would be focusing on what happened, where am I today. If it's health related, I'm ready and able to go to work, because I think there's an elephant in the room, because someone's going to want to know what happened. So I think what I would be doing is working on a short soundbite to here's what happened, but move the conversation much more to everything is good. I'm in a good place now. I'm ready, willing, and able to go to work. Here are some people who know me, who can vouch for my my work product, my work ethic, and I would welcome the opportunity for you to reach out to them. So I wouldn't, I feel more comfortable dealing with it as opposed to, not addressing the elephant in the room.
Carol, do you have any thoughts on that? Or if not, there's another question that's, sort of a corollary about what you would say or not say, and that's, what do you say when it was your fault? Let's say you didn't make your hourly requirements and so you were let go. So do you want to add on to what Mark said or just go forward to this next question?
Okay. First of all, I completely agree with what Mark said. If you had a situation that was a one-time situation and it's in the past, and it's something like a major surgery that you're comfortable about talking about, when you're dealing with personal issues in your life or, a divorce or some other kind of thing, that's a little more problematic. Something like a major surgery, if you were to say, and this is the case, that it for a period of time negatively impacted your work ability, but that is completely in the past, and you would be able to provide references about what you're capable of doing, I completely agree with Mark. Now, if it's something, Kathy, you said the question was if
you feel it was your fault and something as concrete as you didn't make your hours, so you were let go.
Okay. All right. There are a number of reasons why people don't make their hours, and we could talk for hours about that. But if you didn't make your hours because you weren't given enough hours, because there wasn't enough work, because if you can say things that are objective about your situation so that you're not casting aspersions on your employer, but you're just saying something objective, like this practice area diminished because this law changed, these partners left, anything like that is objective, that's a perfectly fine thing to say. And if most people didn't make their hours, or there were a number of people who were let go for the same reason in the same practice group, that's also perfectly fine to say. If you didn't make your hours because other people were making their hours, but you weren't given the work to do, or you weren't doing a good job of the work that you were given to do, and you know that that's the case, then this is really an opportunity for you to sit down with somebody who really understands the profession or understands, your what you could do with your skill set generally, and think about what you may need to change substantively or in terms of practice setting in your next job so that the same thing doesn't happen again. So part of it is understanding whether the fact you didn't make your own hours is due to more to external circumstances or something about yourself.
That's so interesting because, we talk a lot about people thinking that maybe this was something wrong with me and I need to do better next time, and that's true. And there are lots of sectors within the law, lots of things a person can do with a law degree. So if you really chafed and hated making hours or trying to make hours, then that tells you something you want to think about. Is this law firm setting where hours are the key, the best setting for me? But Mark, we have another question that leads us right to our topic of this, what not to say. The person asks about, not wanting to put down her former employer when she decides what to say and what not to say. Do you have some thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that you can't say negative things about any former employer, including the one who might have just let you go. I think no bashing falls under the category, which I think I can say here is, don't be stupid. You are a lawyer. Show them that you're a professional, and you want to make sure that this is one of those things where I've seen so many folks so many attorneys get themselves into trouble, and it really goes back to the beginning because they weren't ready to start. They weren't ready to start because they hadn't dealt with the raw issues. So this is the don't be stupid category, and say everything's got to be positive and professional, and don't go negative.
Carol?
I completely agree with that. I mean, one thing that you will find in most communities is that because most lawyers are specialists, and if you are looking for a job that's in an area that you already have experience in, if you have been working for someone who is particularly horrible, most potential employers will actually know that. So, you know, you need to, in fact, very often if you must stay positive, but you might be surprised at how often people will say, you know, I understand the issue that you may have had, you know, at that particular firm or company or with that particular person. The other thing that's important, and I know this sounds counterintuitive, but when lawyers let lawyers go, they tend to become very paranoid. So it's important that you have a conversation very, very soon after you've received the news to talk to the person and assure them that you are not going to say something bad about them or about the firm, and to actually talk about what you could say that would be consistent with what they would say as a reference. And references are a very important issue, and you obviously don't want to mention anyone in an interview, even mention their name, if they're not someone you would use as a reference. Oftentimes, you know, it may be just one person that you didn't get along well with, and you can eliminate that person from the process and think about whom else you may be able to use who could say very good things about you.
You know, Carol, I think that kind of falls under your rubric, your category of, you know, exercising good judgment. And I think you had an interesting rule of thumb that you mentioned to me. Do you remember what it was about never saying something?
Yeah. When you are speaking to a potential employer or a networking contact, or you're in an interview, you want to never say anything that if your former employer were a fly on the wall, that person would be unhappy to hear.
Right.
Yeah, keep in mind, you want to be moving forward, and if you're focusing on the negative, it's like being in a ditch. It's not helping you. It's not advancing your cause. And what you want to show a prospective employer is the type of person you are and the type of lawyer that you will be. So echoing exactly what Carol said, the most important thing here is judgment. So if someone was doing that, what I would be thinking, or what any prospective employer would be thinking, is, does this person have the right judgment? So that's what you want to be focusing on, and you've got to keep on moving forward.
Right, and you know, I think the way Carol sort of termed it is being objective, positive, or at least objective about your search, and never negative. And I think that, Mark, that really underscores what you're saying.
Right, because once you say something that you shouldn't have, you can't take it back, and people will pick up on your cues even if you don't come right out and say something. And especially in the world we're in now with the internet, you know, things just travel all over the place. So you've got to be really, really mindful and careful about what you say and to whom, and you are the one who's in control of this.
And, you know, that's interesting about you know, really being mindful about what you're not going to say. And what about shifting to, you know, what it is you do need to be ready to say in a search following a job loss? Mark, can you keep on with
Absolutely.
on that?
You need to be able to explain succinctly why you're in the market. And the way when I'm working with students and alums, I say, think of it as a headline, and that's going to be your talking point, and you're going to want to stay on message. I mean, the whole goal here is it's not to, is really when you're talking to someone on the other side that he or she is nodding their head and says, I get it. And once you get that point, you're on message.
Can you give us an example of what you mean and what it might sound like to be on message?
So one message easily could be, so maybe your employer was phasing out a practice group. Maybe the employer was laying off lawyers to be leaner for a merger. Maybe because the work was slower in a particular area that they were realigning their staffing to be more consistent with the workflow. Those are things that anybody would get. It's not like, because it could happen to anybody, and it's succinct, and if someone wanted to follow up and ask you a couple questions about it, they could, but with that headline, you've got a succinct talking point that anyone on the other side would immediately get and understand.
Yeah, and I think for an example from one of our listeners, too, because I know people really like and need examples. When we had the question about the health issue, and while someone did note, if you want to keep your private health matters private, that should be your call, and we understand that. We're not disagreeing with that. But someone also suggested that the person who had lost the job, to do a health issue might say that, they chose to leave, and because they knew they weren't able to give the job their best effort for that period of time and didn't want to take advantage of ADA or be, contentious or alienate their employer, and so they, chose to, move forward. And I think that's the kind of thing we're talking about with regard to being positive and truthful. But also, Carol, let me ask you this, because you mentioned one of the ways of staying positive was to, kind of line up references and refer to people who would be available to talk about the situation or about you. And somebody asked, and I want you to address that, but somebody also asked, what if you don't have a reference from the place from which you were terminated? And how do you address that if you're trying to line up references but you actually don't have one from the place that you just left?
Okay. And
having to do, by the way, with staying on message, yeah.
Right. That happens, surprisingly often. Because, again, there is a tendency for lawyers, to be litigation averse, so to not say very much. The fact is, almost all of my clients who think that they don't have any reference from the place that they were most recently at, and of course a lot of it depends on where you are in your career. I mean, many, many, many people, probably most, have at least one job that was just a mistake, and it just wasn't a good fit. And if you've got a long history before that, oftentimes references from prior to the most recent job will be sufficient. But what I often find is that people don't think about references that they could have who are connected with the job that they are just leaving, which could be, again, clients, other people who have left the firm and know you and can actually put the situation into, those are the people who might be able to say some of the negative things that you can't say on your behalf, and, explain a situation that a firm or a partner or an individual at a firm or a corporation might not be able to say for themselves. So thinking in terms of who are all of the people with whom you've been connected during your time that you've been at that employer, and oftentimes even people who have worked for you. I've seen many situations of more junior lawyers who have been absolutely thrilled to say wonderful things about more senior lawyers and particularly in situations which I often encounter where firms have just stopped making partner, so someone is passed over, but they're given some reason that sort of is pathologizing and not really true, but other people could speak to that more directly. So a lot of it is just thinking about whom all have you come into contact with at this employer who might be able to say something good about you, not necessarily your direct supervisor.
And also, I think, to set people's mind at ease, if they don't have an internal reference, I think you had a cautionary thought about that because people don't always know, even what happened.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have seen so many situations recently where layoffs are kept private. I have several clients currently where a partner was let go and his or her practice group head didn't even know that the person was asked to leave. So as a practicality, you want to just sit down and really think about this anthropologically. I mean, maybe I have training in this, and you may want to draw power charts and sort of figure out where the lines are and try to understand the politics and economics of your particular situation. Your message may also end up being as simple as saying that it makes better economic sense to be somewhere where the kind of work that you are doing, because there's lockstep-based, lockstep seniority-based billing rates, where you have come to a point where what you are being billed out at is not consistent with the type of practice you're in. About 80% of the kinds of work that were done at big firms when I was a junior associate in the late 70s are not being done at big firms anymore because of billing rates. So a lot of it is just understanding, and very often it's just moving to a different kind of practice setting where the economics line up better with what it is that you are doing.
Yeah, before we move on, I want to go to our quick tips in a minute. But Mark, do you have one last thought here on this issue, the issues we've been discussing?
Yeah, I think the real question started out on, references, and I said you can always break down what different people at your prior places of employment or beyond, how they could be helpful to you in your search. You want people who can talk about you, who know you, and, think about it. If you're having a hard time finding a reference, the person on the other side is wondering, well, what's that all about? So your job is to assuage their concern. So if there's nobody from your current employer, what you want to think about is let's put some other people who know me really well and can really help hit it out of the park or at least assuage their concern. That will I think that will help you considerably. Just put yourself in the other shoes. They're wondering what's going on. You want to at least give them some other people who know you.
Right, and people who know what a good lawyer you are, not just talking about what happened or what didn't happen, but to talk about your skills and traits and service.
And what you're like to work with, of course, and that what it's like to work with you.
Right. Somebody asked, and I think for now we'll just say, are there differences for in-house attorneys compared to law firm attorneys? And I think we think that, this advice is across the board in terms of, no matter where you're coming from in your search, that, you have to confront these same issues and topics and thoughts. But speaking of moving ahead, let me take us to our quick tips so that we can just get some quick thoughts to change up the pace a little bit here. I think we got 2 tips first from Mark, and then we have 2 from Carol. So, Mark, your first tip.
First one is to be strategic. If your last job didn't work out, think hard about what might be a better environment or a better sector or size or workplace for you. It's never smart to kind of throw your career against the wall and to see what sticks. So you want to be strategic. My second point would be, and I've been alluding to it, is have talking points that help you stay on message as to what happened, what you're seeking, and otherwise you might say things that you could regret. And the thing I want to say here is it's not only having talking points. I think what's really important here is that you're comfortable talking about it, because the person on the other side is going to be taking the cues from you. If you're comfortable, they're comfortable. So I won't let a student or alum who's going to an interview, after a difficult issue, I will grill them to make sure that they are really comfortable, because if they can get past me, I know they're going to do fine in the interview. But it's all about you. So it's not just staying on message. It's how others will react, and they're going to take the cue from how you respond.
And I think, Carol, your next tip, though it looks to me like kind of a difficult one, sort of feeds into that thought of Mark's. You say try not to take a job loss, personally, if it wasn't personal. And what do you mean by that?
Okay. The main thing there is to show your professional maturity in speaking with prospective employers. And if you can, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, if you can understand and briefly explain the economics of a situation, that's impressive to potential employers. And if you can express an understanding about a downsizing or a workplace merging or even closing its doors, it shows a maturity that prospective employers will appreciate. So, that's very important. The other thing is to really look at what you've done and be able to functionalize your experience so that you can express it in different ways in your resume or cover applications to different employers. Most people have experience that could be moved into a different sector. When I was a junior lawyer, in fact, employers encouraged us to have much more broad-based experience. Now, both in law firms and in-house, it's much more common for people to be siloed. But even though that's the case, you almost always can express your experience in a form that will show a prospective employer that you could be doing something different. So it's really treating the job loss as an opportunity, but to make sure that, if you remember first year civil procedure, pleading inconsistently and then the alternative, to make sure that the facets of yourself that you are presenting to a prospective employer are those that will be of particular interest to that employer at that time, which means that most of you can present yourself in at least a half a dozen different ways. And part of that just comes from talking to people either who are at the place or who know the legal environment as a whole in your area to help you to be able to do that.
And, I think that kind of already then spoke to your final tip, treating the situation as the opportunity.
Right.
You've got a clean slate. You may not have gotten to choose your own timing, but we do want you to think about, if not fully reinventing yourself, the sort of opportunity this is that frees you to look where you might not have looked otherwise. And, speaking of looking, and we've been taking, questions and we'll continue to do, but I want to move along also to the sort of moment I talked about, which was, agree, disagree. And I think on that topic, let me ask you this, Carol. Some people think that if they've lost a job, then going out to network can be just a waste of time. Do you agree with that, or you disagree with that?
I completely disagree with that. But I can understand why people roll their eyes when somebody says that to them, because most people don't know how to network productively, and if all you're doing is just sending your resume to someone and saying, I'm looking for a job, do you know of anything, that can make you feel bad about yourself, like some kind of a supplicant, and usually is a waste of time. What I recommend is that you do what I have done as a way of life on behalf of my clients for the last 25 years, which is that everyone that I meet, I ask them to talk to me about their careers, what they like and don't like, what the needs may be in their particular area of practice or at their particular employer, so that you're really going more on a listening tour, and then you can get back to either that particular person or employer, or understand enough about that particular sector that the way you're presenting yourself is as an answer to people's needs. One of the questions that I often ask is, if the ideal person could show up to work for you tomorrow, what would that person be able to do? Or what are the issues that keep you awake at night? So that your networking initially is really more getting people to talk about themselves, and then you're presenting yourself not as somebody who is asking them for something, but as somebody who is offering a solution to their problems.
Right, and we find if you're strategic, as Mark mentioned, people are out there to help, and you can also network nowadays on LinkedIn. But I think, Carol's really other point for the long term is that, it's a silver lining whenever you connect with people. Even if they don't have a lead for you right now, you never know when that will come back, as part of your positive network to help. So we don't want you to hesitate in terms of networking. But Mark, I got to ask you in terms of agree, disagree, talking about, hesitating. Do you agree or disagree? An interview is not a confessional.
I agree. You can't lie, but you don't need to volunteer details that you're not asked about. I think I've heard you say, Kathy, that lawyers need to blend the truth with advocacy, and I couldn't agree more. But then in an interview, neither side is necessarily sharing the whole truth. That goes for law students as well as alums. This is all about exercising good judgment. So I completely agree. It's not a confessional.
Well, somebody asked an interesting question, sort of along those lines, and let me throw it out to you, Mark, in follow-up. She said, it seems that most employers prefer to hire people who are already employed. So should your message be in your cover letter? Will it help? Because or are you supposed to wait, kind of not to make an interview a confessional, but to be able to present this message we've been talking about? What about timing in the search process?
Well, what have you been doing? If you're not, I think the question, it's hard to answer that without knowing the whole story. But what I would say is, and I would have to understand the why, but I would have no problem. If someone wasn't employed, I don't have a problem with that if you've got a good story to tell. But I think you really want to be careful and exercise good thought. So I think a lot of these will depend on the specific facts. So it's hard to say, with that question. Is there any more information on that question, Kathy?
No, but I think, for example, if someone's been doing, pro bono work, or they've been going to, CLEs and to stay current, but they've had a situation, somebody asks, what if you've been out of work for several years? And someone else asks, what if you did it because you had, really some family situations and you just wanted to be confident that you could get back to your career, but, help your family in the transition. Do you say that kind of thing in a cover letter, I think is the question, or do you kind of wait, till you get to the interview and then, raise it there in addition to what you've been doing and why?
if I'm looking at, if you put something in front of a lawyer, they're going to look for the holes. I think when you have an opportunity to manage the message and you can do it in a way in the cover letter that makes sense, you're answering the big question in the room, and they say, again, okay, I get it. Now, again, it would depend on the specifics, but I would not have it, that I don't think that would fall in against saying that's not being a confessional, that's being a good advocate and looking at the elephant in the room. And if someone said to me, I've been out of work for a few years because I needed to take care of family and had to address other issues, now that hole is now explained, and I think it could make it easier going into the interview. But a lot of these you really need to sit down with, an excellent career counselor like Kathy or Carol, or going to your career services offices to really drill down more about the particular facts. But I don't think that would be a disqualifier.
Right, and sometimes I say, you at least allude to, I want to talk with you about what I've been doing, in the last, whatever period of time, and the way I'm looking forward to contribute to your organization. So, I think, Mark, you're right. It depends on the facts, and, but you do want to be positive and be controlling your message and making your choices. So I think that all works out.
And one thing I want to say, Kathy, I have hired 5 folks in my office who have taken a break from work because they had to go. They were taking care of family and personal matters. I found them to be the best, colleagues I've had, and I think once you can explain the message, I got it. It's not someone's not going to look at you and say, that is so crazy that you were taking care of family or that you were taking care of a loved one because of a health problem. People get it, and in many ways, I think your stock can go up.
Yeah, I agree.
I have a couple of other things to add about that.
Sure.
I think it's very important that you express to a potential employer that you are willing to come in at the level where your skills meet their current needs. Oftentimes, if you have been away from work for a period of time, or if what you're going to be doing is something that is slightly different from what you've done, it's important to bring up that particular issue. Also, as Kathy alluded to, things like CLEs or other things that you have done to keep yourself up to date in certain areas, you can certainly put those on your resume. It doesn't matter how you know something, it's that you know it. There are many ways. Most CLE providers, if you send them a letter and say to them that you are a lawyer who's out of work and you would like a scholarship to particular programs, if they're not completely subscribed, they want the rooms filled. They will give that to you. And that's something a lot of people don't know. Also, most law firms provide CLE programs for clients. I get invited to that kind of stuff all the time. It's very easy to get yourself invited to things like that. It's wonderful networking opportunities, and you can get free CLE that way. Another thing that oftentimes helps is to say that although you're looking for a permanent position, you would be willing to come in on a temporary basis initially, so that you can show them that you actually do have what it is that they're looking for. Again, lawyers, being the risk-averse people that they are, will often respond positively to that. And one more thing that frequently comes up is, and it's really related to, what Mark was talking about with having other kinds of issues in your life that you need to deal with, is that very often people are looking for a job that might be less than full-time. And the fact is, when you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics information about lawyers, you'll find that a great many people are working fewer than 40 hours a week. That is not because the legal profession is, inherently flexible. It's because many employers actually don't need lawyers to work on a full-time basis in certain areas. So if you indicate your flexibility, you will often find employers who will actually offer you something that will fit what you need. And that's true of companies. I find many, many companies that don't have in-house lawyers, for some of you who are a little more senior, if you understand a particular business area, you reach out to a company that doesn't have an in-house lawyer, you talk about, the magic words are, I could save you money, I understand your industry, we should talk. It's amazing how many people have been able to create their own jobs that way. So a lot of it is thinking outside of the box.
Right, and I like the fact that you just talked about being creative. We have some questions that we weren't able to get to. People are sort of expressing well, here's my story, could I really say that, or gee, I feel stale. What we want to advise you here in some is to, be creative, but try not to, be afraid of your story or your situation. And in fact, if you've got time, Carol mentions, go to CLEs and whatnot, but you can offer to speak. In my experience, bar associations and other organizations are often happy to have speakers, and if you know a certain subject matter, even if you're junior, from a junior lawyer's perspective, certainly across the board from a more senior lawyer's perspective, then you have something for your resume as well. You just want to be able to kind of be doing some things and show what you're doing and why, and not shy away from this whole process. And I think that sort of leads us to actually the final things that we want to tell you in thinking further beyond the program. Mark, I think you had a first thought that's kind of relevant here, and then I think you guys could alternate, in terms of your takeaways. Can you pick us up?
Well, the first thought is you can't move forward if you're in denial about the past. So you have to look in the mirror and do a reality check about the loss of your job, and then move into a search where you can be both practical and positive.
Right. And Carol, your next tip sort of dovetails with that. What else should they continue to think about?
Understanding, managing your moods and expectations. And that really, goes along with the theme that has underlied a lot of what we've been saying today, which is, speaking with people who are positive, who know you, and who will, help you to feel good when you're down, but help you to feel good in a practical sense. I always say to my clients that, the goal here is to try to find the conjunction between what would be practical and what would be what would be realistic and what would be good for you.
Satisfying, right.
You said, yes, between what would be satisfying and what would be realistic. Thank you, Kathy. And the other thing is understanding that what you are experiencing, because most lawyers don't talk to each other. So if you talk to somebody who is dealing with a great many lawyers, like Mark or Kathy or myself, they can help you to universalize what you are experiencing. One of the things that drives people crazy, and it drives me crazy as a counselor too, is that very often you just won't hear back at all, and that's just part of the rudeness that permeates our society today. But to understand that that is not something that's bad about you, but that is just ubiquitous. And if you've done everything you can do, you just move on. But it's not because you've somehow, offended someone or whatever. if all you are doing is sitting at home and responding to job listings from your computer, you probably aren't going to get very far, because there are, Mark said, the numbers of applications that all of these places get are, thousands and thousands. So that is where strategic networking to find the right people to help them to fish your application out of a giant pile will be helpful to you. The fact that people can just, sit at home and do everything from home is more of a negative than a positive, because it makes many people feel that if they're doing that 24/7 and they're not getting responses, that it's their fault. And in reality, that's not the way that effective job searching works.
Right, and I think one of you told me that if you're averaging even 10% in responses, you're doing pretty well. And I know that it's upsetting to people. Their confidence wanes and whatnot. But isn't that another reason why you can't isolate yourself? You talked about reaching out to people who sort of lift your spirits, have your back, or on your side. Is that another? Give yourself permission, to go to coffee with someone, or do something that kind of fuels you, because this is, like Mark said, it's a process. And
well,
so
that's why the free CLE is so important. Why
yeah.
actually getting out and being in, rooms with other people, and understanding that there are so many resources that are available to lawyers who are in transition that will get you, out of your house or apartment and connecting up with other people.
Someone asked Carol, how can they find out which firms or employers provide CLE so that they could see about going, getting invited, whatever? How do they find that out?
Actually, most of the firm's websites will give you that kind of information. But if you have friends who are at, any firms, I would just reach out to them and say, is your firm providing CLE programs in the near future, and can you just get me on a list of invitees? I say I get invited to 3 or 4 of those a day.
The other thing you can do is check with the director of professional development if there is one in many of the firms. That would be an easy place to start.
Good. Okay, Mark, I think we're on your final takeaway. Losing a job can be a career advantage in the long run. What?
I think about that personally, and I think about it for myself as well as so many students and alums that I have worked with. That sometimes the setback can be the best thing that happened to you. Students and graduates from Harvard and all law schools face this kind of career setback. We actually find that the earlier in one's career that people encounter a job loss, the better, in a sense, that the people learn a great deal about themselves that they can take forward. One of our former colleagues, Deborah Aaron, she wrote a book called What Can You Do with a Law Degree? Which I think is fantastic. But the way she has a framework, I think is something you should think about. She talks about there's trade-offs and that you need to ask yourself, who am I, where am I going, and what am I willing to give up to get what I want? And when you go through that framework, this could help you a lot as you're thinking about your next steps.
Okay,
but
good.
No matter, I was just going to say,
sorry.
Again and again, when we see the job loss, I can't tell you when you hit the fast forward button how many times when I'm speaking with students and alums, it turns out to be the best thing that happened to them.
Yeah, we become more resilient. We know we can handle challenges, all these good things. Nothing we, would have asked for necessarily, but there are, as Carol says, silver linings. So, Carol, let me turn to you. We're about done here. The very last point, quickly, is yours. No matter what, you haven't wasted your career. So can you quickly tell us what you mean by that?
True. There is, I do think that there is somewhat of a, myth of the magical law degree that you can just automatically do anything with a law degree, but you have skills, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, if you can functionalize them in the right way, by virtue of having gone to law school, you are, one of the smartest people in the country. A lot of it is just figuring out how to express those skills in the right way. What I find is that many people went into law to fulfill somebody else's dream or because they couldn't think of anything else to do at the time. So if you really are feeling that this is not something that's satisfying to you, it's an opportunity to really, rethink the whole process and recapture control over your whole life.
Right, and whether you decide to be a lawyer or go beyond the law, I think Carol's saying, these are some of the ways you gain back control over the rest of your career. And so we have to wrap up, and I want to, thank everyone. And Carol has a great article, How to Survive Those Pink Slip Blues, that we want to commend you to so that you can read more. One of our listeners just said there's a book that helped her called Congratulations, You've Been Fired. We want you to think more, read more, do more. We thank you on behalf of the ABA for being with us today. I thank my speakers. They're wonderful. If our listeners would, look at the page about the series and hopefully sign up for, the next programs. We have one in April on business development. We have them in the future depending on where you are that'll apply for you. But please stay on the line. Give us your thoughts. Fill in the evaluation. And again, Mark and Carol, thank you immensely and all.
And thank you, Mark and Kathy.